Hard hat's all about showing up to play hard, doing what it takes to win.
If you want to cement legacy, win another.
He's your third center.
You don't want to pump him up too much, but it's hard not to.
This is maybe the most I've ever agreed with you.
Hey, Boy Manning here. Chris Gasper alongside for a Thursday edition of the Garden Report. Had a game 6. We got a game 6, Chris. The season continues. The series continues here, and there's a lot going on. That was a crazy night over at TD Garden between the Tatum stuff, the game itself, and of course now a turnaround to New York to try to keep this thing going.
Yeah, really gutsy performance, obviously, by the Celtics. I thought they would respond, but I didn't think they'd respond as forcefully as they did with the 25-point win and really just taking that game over in the second half with their defense. It's really interesting when you look at this series, Bobby. It's amazing. They've had a double-digit second-half lead in every game of the series, and yet they find themselves down 3-2. They're plus 35 overall on the series, and yet they're down 3-2 and trying to become just the 14th team in NBA history to come back from a 3-1 deficit. I mean, 95, almost 96% of the time. It's like 95.6% of the time, including this year's playoffs. If you go down 3-1, you're done. You're losing the series.
Yeah, and especially when your best player goes down while going down 3-1. You thought this thing was over heading into game 5, that maybe that would be too much for them to overcome from a game plan standpoint, but also mentally. A quick turnaround coming back from New York and having to play in front of the home crowd. I will say the atmosphere in there was great.
It was.
Even standing outside pregame, fans were flooding in. There were a lot of Knicks fans, I think, ready to see this thing close out and go to their first East Final since, 2000, I want to say?
25 years, yep.
Yeah, so they didn't get that. But the Celtics fans, to me, and I talked to a couple of them up front, a lot of the sentiment was just wanting to see this team one more time potentially here, just enjoying whatever came yesterday, because the Tatum stuff was just awful. When you think he could miss all of next year, that this could alter his career, and you saw some signs for him out there, some T-shirts and all that, but he just had this massive franchise-altering moment the day before, or 2 days before. So I think for a lot of fans, it was a terrible loss in game 4, and you could have imagined, especially losing after the first quarter, there's some boos raining down, them really getting on this team. But the Tatum injury, I think, leads to not only the team rallying together a little bit, and you heard about some of the stuff they did over the 24 to 48 hours there after it happened, but also the fans rallying around this team. To me, Chris, that was the best crowd of the season by far.
That's interesting. I mean, you're at more of these games than I am, Bobby. There were a lot of Knicks fans. I mean, I will say at one point I think it was the first half, I was taking some notes and I put my head down with Mitchell Robinson at the free throw line, and I heard this huge cheer, and I'm like, oh, he missed. And then I looked up, and it's like there was an extra point for the Knicks, and I was like, what? Yeah. So it was, but the Celtics fans, I think, certainly did turn out. You couldn't blame them if they didn't. And you're absolutely right about the Tatum injury. I mean, I've been saying this, and I talked to someone, with the Celtics about it, and they were saying, as long as you put it in the proper context, it's not hyperbole. And so, look, this is not a life-threatening situation for Tatum, but in Celtics history, I put that injury up there with occurrences like Len Bias and getting robbed of watching him play on a Celtics team that was a championship contender in the 80s, and adding him in 87. What would have happened then with the Celtics? And Reggie Lewis, so again, within reason. Obviously, in those cases, you had basketball players that lost their lives. That's not the case for Jayson Tatum. He will be back. But you do feel similar to those cases that maybe an era of Celtics basketball and an era of Celtics success has taken a huge hit and gotten cut short.
Yeah, and that's the grimace outlook on this potentially, especially if the Celtics do go on to lose this series, and all the stats you mentioned that they still face here to overcome this thing, along with the fact that they have to do it without Tatum, do it without Porzingis potentially here as well, and we'll get to that in a little bit. It still doesn't look great for them right now, as good as that win was last night. But the timing of this thing, and there's never a good time for this to happen, but the fact that it happens in the middle of a playoff run and ahead of next season, where he's probably going to miss, I guess his dad said 8 to 9 months here they're expecting.
That's
This is
aggressive
gonna.
too, by the way. I mean, that's as someone who's covered Achilles, particularly in the NFL, where guys can come back a little faster. 8 or 9 months is aggressive. I'm not saying it's impossible, but that's a very aggressive timeline.
Yeah, and I know there's some new treatments now and stuff, and there's been a lot of information flying around on that front. I'm interested to hear, when we talk to Brad or whatever happens after the season here, if we get some specifics on that. But they didn't put a timeline out themselves. But he's going to miss most of next year. That guys usually aren't right until probably about a year after this thing, and some guys are never right again. A doctor told me 25 to 30%, I believe, of NBA players never come back from it. The Stars have had more success, but Jeff Stotts, I believe, with In Street Clothes, who tracks a lot of this injury stuff, cited a study that I think there were like 9 All-Stars that they looked at with this injury here, and only 4 of them got back to the level that they were before previously. And you can, cite a lot of them. I'm sure you remember a lot of these cases, Chris. The Kobe one, he was Kobe again for a little bit after that. A lot of the guys who suffered this were older than Tatum is right now, which lends itself to ending your career or having it change your career drastically. But the example that really killed me when I heard it, someone who had it at the same age as him, is DeMarcus Cousins. And again, completely different player, completely different body, suffered an ACL injury after that as well. But his career effectively ended after this thing. So, we know how serious Tatum takes his body, how deliberate he's probably going to be and cautious with this recovery. But this is a really difficult one for guys to come back from here. And he is squarely in his prime right now, about to miss his 28-year-old season now as well. It's like, I know you're putting in some dark terms there with the Lewis and bias stuff, but I get why you are, because this is just catastrophic for this team. It really is.
Yeah, it is. And I'll throw another guy in there who was a great player before he, had some injuries. And I'm not saying it's the same, injury here, but, Brandon Roy, you remember him, what he was in his prime?
Oh, he had the Achilles, huh?
So it's like, he's another guy that you look at and you say, oh man, that he had a lot of heel, I don't know if it was his Achilles, but he had a lot of heel issues.
Yeah.
And so that was a guy who, you look at and say, oh man, that guy was unbelievable. And I feel like people kind of forget about him a little bit. So it is one of those things. Now we look at the positives. You look at a guy like Kevin Durant, and I feel like he pretty much was 90% or is 90 to 95% of what he was before the injury. I've gotten in debates with people over that. Some people feel like, oh, he came back exactly the same. Just my opinion. He's 5 to 10% off, but still obviously one of the best players in the world. And I think that the length that Tatum has, and that's been a comparison over the years for Tatum, has been Kevin Durant. So his length and ability to shoot over the top of people with that length will help him. But I don't know about you. I mean, I don't feel like Durant came back and had 100% the same explosiveness getting to the rim. He could still get to his spots, and he's a mid-range master and always has been. But in terms of getting to the rim, I don't feel like he was 100. He was still very good, but not 100% what he was. And it's just hard to find, because Tatum's 27, Bobby, and I still feel like he was an ascending player. And so I find it hard to find guys that had an Achilles and came back and were better after that, like continued on an upward arc. Yeah.
And there's some good positives here too, in terms of how they treated it. They got the surgery immediately. That's got to be beneficial. They went to the same doctor Durant did. So I think that makes you feel good. One of the better players who's ever come back from this thing, going to the same doctor as him. I guess would Tiger Woods have an Achilles tear too? They threw his name in there.
Yep.
Okay. So yeah, this is a rough one. But again, I've heard about some new ways that they do it. And depending on the tear location, we've all been down there Aaron Rodgers Road, right? With his situation there. And that one's a little hard to decipher. But some football players have come back really fast from this. I do wonder why it takes basketball players a little longer. It seems like that's generally the case.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, maybe because there's more jumping in basketball. That's just, I'm obviously not a doctor. I'm just spitballing, but maybe because there's a lot more jumping and landing, and both sports obviously have change of direction. But NFL, you can sort of break in the huddle, and it depends in the NFL what position you play in terms of maybe how quickly you can come back and what you're asking for. It's probably a little tougher. Running back, I've heard people throw Cam Akers out there who had that injury as a running back. He hasn't been quite the same. Wide receiver.
He
Those
had
are
2
guys
though.
whose motions are more similar to basketball players in terms of lateral movement, quick cuts. Whereas, other stuff, if it's a little more straight line, like on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, definitely. And we'll circle back to some of the big picture implications of this here, but Celtics
Yeah.
still alive for now. And, the one thing I said when this happened, really compelling storyline now of Jaylen Brown, who's been in the shadow of Tatum a little bit, obviously won the Finals MVP and the East Finals MVP all that a year ago, and has been maybe a 1B at times, right up there with Tatum. But again, this has been Tatum's team for their most successful years over the last 3-4 seasons. This is Jaylen Brown's team now, and he's talked in multiple circumstances or instances rather about how he could lead his own team, how he has to sacrifice to play here in Boston, those sort of things. Well, this is his chance, and it was great to hear that he and Al Horford addressed the team before the game and try to refocus them on this series, this moment, that he performed on this level. Stepping into Tatum's role and 12 assists. The playmaking was out of this world for him.
He really was, yeah.
Yesterday. The ball movement of the team as a whole. And, what I love more than anything is he didn't try to put everything on himself. I know everyone was pointing to the Game 7 against the Heat in 2023 when Tatum went down. It was a totally different approach for him that night compared to this one, where he relied on other guys, where he got everyone involved, where he didn't dominate the ball. He spread the wealth. And I thought it was probably their best ball movement game of the entire postseason. I think the stats bear that out too. The way he led this team on a dime, in a very difficult circumstance was encouraging because he's going to have to do it for well over a year now.
Yeah, and I think that is one of the interesting subplots of this whole thing is, does it expose weaknesses in Jaylen Brown's game, or does it highlight how good he could be if he weren't being asked to play Robin to Tatum's Batman? And I've joked over the years that's a very common analogy, Batman and Robin. But what I've said for a while, Bobby, and I truly believe this, look, Tatum's the best player on the team and he's better than Brown. But this team's success to me, and you look at last year when they won the championship, and as you mentioned, Jaylen was both Eastern Conference Finals and NBA Finals MVP. They won last year because of the tandem, not Tatum. And I feel like the team's success is the tandem, the Jays together, not just Tatum. I feel like this is more like Superman and Batman than Batman and Robin. But we'll see that. We'll see whether Jaylen can perform efficiently when there's so much more attention on him than there is when Tatum's in there. And I know you've covered the team now for a while. I mean, the on-off numbers with Tatum are like crazy. Jaylen has gotten opportunities through the rotation to be the guy, and the numbers are not great. Now, obviously, he was great in Game 5, and so this is something we want to see moving forward. You're right about the playmaking. They had 27 assists, only 9 turnovers, so 3-to-1 ratio is great. And it's amazing to me, when they lost Game 4, they had 15 assists as a team. Jaylen had 12 assists on his own in Game 5. So the ball was popping last night. I thought he set the tone. He did what you want a superstar to do, which is get the other guys going, as Shaq would say, get the others going first, then look for yours.
Yeah, and the diving play into the bench, a real moment. I know Joe pointed to that one as the play of the game, led some free throws the other way. There was all kinds of great defensive plays from him on Brunson. I believe he hit Brunson with 2 of the fouls. 5 fouls on Brunson in the third quarter, which is a crazy sequence in this game, alongside all the Luke stuff that we'll get to in a second here. And they got a good whistle in this game. They took advantage of it. And the one thing I love here is you do see a little bit of a different style playing through Brown compared to playing with Tatum. There's a little more urgency. There's a little more pace. Pace was so badly needed in this series from them. It was a big part of their collapses in the first 2 games. I felt like was playing too slow, getting too stagnant. And as wild as Brown can be at times, and the turnovers tick up and you get the frustration of the handle and all that stuff, I do sometimes like, or at least appreciate, maybe there being a mistake or two because he's aggressive, because he's urgent, because he's attacking downhill. And, we can go to the 3-point discussion if you want. This is the only element here. And we talked about it, I think, when he was going through the injury, that gives them that transition component, that gives them that downhill component. And he's posting up more than ever before this year, too, and really using his strength, especially where he hasn't had his burst with the injury here. The problem is, as we know, he's still dealing with an injury here. And how does he look on any given night, especially after one night rest here, after carrying a heavy load in this game? Maybe it looks a little different in Game 6. This team's really beat up right now, but again, huge credit to what he did in this moment.
Yeah, and I mean, we didn't talk enough, and we're just talking about it now. But I mean, we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about he did all that he did on the offensive end in terms of conducting the offense, and took on the challenge of guarding Brunson, and I thought did a really
Mhm.
good job on Brunson. Gave a little more physicality, a little more length in Brunson's face, and Derek White's a fabulous defender, no question about it. But I mean, Brunson torched him in Game 4.
In that game 4, oh, it was bad.
Yeah, it was bad. And so Jaylen not only took on, you think of it this way, he sort of took on three mantles in that game. The mantle of leadership in terms of, hey, let's make sure guys don't have their heads down and working with Al to inspire the team. The mantle of running the offense running through him. And then the mantle of taking on the opposing team's best player, taking on that challenge of guarding him. I mean, that's really a lot. And that's when I look at it sometimes and feel like, Jayson overshadows Jaylen, not Jayson's fault, but people don't sort of fully appreciate Jaylen because of how good Jayson is. And it's kind of ironic because going into the playoffs, I was concerned about Jaylen's injury, and I was looking at it and thinking, man, I don't know how much he's going to be able to play. But you know what? The silver lining is this is an opportunity for Tatum to sort of buttress his legacy because Jaylen's not really going to be able to help him. And now it's kind of the other way around, where it's like in the games that Tatum hasn't played, the Orlando game, Jaylen Brown had 36. He almost had a triple-double in this game. They've won both of those games. They're 10-3 overall this year without Tatum, which I'm not saying, they're better off without Tatum. They're clearly not. That's an interesting number, probably a statistical anomaly, but it's really been Jaylen who's had the opportunity to buttress his reputation, his legacy due to an injury, when I was thinking it was kind of going to be the other way around. I was like, this is going to be the year like Tatum just balls out in the playoffs, and he was against Orlando. And I'm like, this is going to be the year Tatum wins finals MVP. And now, unfortunately, we have this injury, and there's just a lot more on Jaylen. And so the silver lining maybe of it is that maybe you get to see a little bit more of what Jaylen's fully capable of.
Yeah, for sure. You thought you might have to go to a different team to do that down the line, maybe those guys break up and you get the look at what Brown would do as the number one, but now you're going to get it here next season, for better or for worse. And we'll get into that big picture stuff because, again, feels like this series to me is still a long shot for the Celtics to win here. But a couple guys give you some hope here, and the big one's Luke Kornet, who I think probably has to start now. You're probably a little overdue going to more minutes from him, and it took Porzingis, I guess, not being able to breathe in this game, which we'll get to us in a second as well, for them to start Kornet out of halftime and play him extended minutes. I think he played 5 minutes in Game 4, something ridiculously low for Kornet here, and hasn't been as involved in the playoffs as I thought he would be. He had a tremendous year. One of the, I thought, underrated storylines this year was him becoming one of the best pick and roll partners for Tatum. And one of the best in the league when you looked at their combination. Obviously, that's out the window now, but he still did some good stuff with Brown here. And defensively, what he did in the third quarter was silly. He obviously playing off hard and just sitting back at the rim, but he timed his help perfectly. Swooped in on some offensive rebounds. The block on Towns was great, and then he got out to the corner and blocked hard.
Oh yeah,
another block. He ran and saved the ball, and then dunked the other way. I mean, the sequences on defense and offense that this guy pulled off during that run, playing big minutes there too. He comes off the floor exhausted. This is awesome because this guy's been here since 2021 now. He's really developed. He's really changed his game, and very quietly, if you didn't pay attention too much this year, became a real force off their bench at doing the little things that he does here. But this is another level. This was his best game in green by far. The way the crowd was connecting and interacting with him was really cool here in this moment. And listen, Chris, I'm probably his biggest fan, so I'm going to go out about this a little bit here.
No, do it. He deserves it.
This is great. Yeah. And it's awesome for him. Very, very humble guy. Really doesn't expect to play a ton. There's been stretches in his career where he's mostly been a DNP or maybe like a bench jokes energy kind of guy. But he was dominating in this game, like legitimately physically dominating. And that's another cool component here too, is he wasn't a very physical player a couple years ago, and he's really added a lot of muscle. He's really added strength. Defensively, he's playing with more force and aggressiveness here too. Obviously, remember the Kornet contest a couple years ago where he wasn't even trying to block guys; he was just jumping up. Yeah. Now you're getting 7 blocks in a playoff game. Out of this world.
Yeah, I mean 5 in the third quarter, and that's so many of those sequences you're dead on with. But I think maybe my favorite was he blocks OG Anunoby, which is not an easy thing to do. Saves the ball, and then down the other end. Initiates a perfect screen and roll with Sam Hauser. Basically it's like he hands it off to Hauser, great screen, rolls to the rim, gets like a dunk. He really gave it to you on both ends. And he was a huge lift for the Celtics and a huge part of the defense that held the Knicks to 4 of 20 shooting in the third quarter and really, flipped that game. I mean, that was like a 65-65 game. And then the Celtics go on a 16-3 run. And he was a big part of that, being able to deter the Knicks at the rim and just the energy that he gave the team. I know Joe talked about his rebounding too. That had been an issue for the Celtics in game 4, the rebounds and giving up all these offensive rebounds. And I give Kornet a lot of credit because I think, again, what he was able to do defensively was one of the big changes in game 5. You look at game 4, Bobby, points in the paint in game 4. The Celtics got doubled up. It was 64-32 Knicks. In this game, the Celtics ended up with more points in the paint than the Knicks. I think it was 36-26. And so I think Kornet had such a huge effect. I guess my question for you is, I looked at the lineup they put out there last night, which was Porzingis and Horford without Tatum. They went double big off the jump. And, I was looking at that and thinking, is that the right move to make with the Knicks starting lineup? Or do you want to save that for when Mitchell comes in? Why would you do that versus, say, putting Pritchard in the starting lineup?
They've been scared to go small all year, and they've loved
Right.
going big. I think they like the offensive rebounding component there. They're probably worried about the Knicks' offensive rebounding too, which has hurt them at times here. But Porzingis just isn't rebounding well, and we might as well talk about him here while we're on the Kornet topic. They start Porzingis in this game. The stats for Porzingis, particularly with Horford and that double big look, have been awful in the series.
Yeah.
And there's been many times here where you're wondering if Porzingis can even play at all. And in this game, you saw right away missing layups, losing the ball, posting a guy up. The level of or the lack of resistance he's been able to put on smaller defenders, and the way he's just unable to be forceful, trying to back those guys down is really staggering right now. Like guys like Mikal Bridges and others there are defending him with ease. There's no energy. The drop off as the minutes go on there is pretty significant. And you get to obviously 10, 15 minutes in these games and that's it. But game 4, he's out there in the fourth quarter playing important minutes. Game 5 with the season on the line, he starts. Eventually, Joe cuts him off. And, as you heard there, I guess they had a conversation and said, we're only going to use you if you absolutely need to. I get it. You want to have deference to a veteran like that, a guy who's been important, that wants to be part of this thing here. But with your season on the line, you have to make some quick, tough adjustments. And not only this, but the Pritchard thing, not playing him extended minutes until game 3.
Yeah.
Getting
what's
away
up with
from him in
that?
game 4, right after he had the, team leading scoring in that game 3. It doesn't make much sense to me. And Joe talked a lot of this year about how they have different lineups that they can go to, and they're so flexible, and they've tried everything. They did a ton of experimenting during the year. And in the playoffs, they've gone the other way where they've tightened things up. They've relied on the starters more. They haven't gone to those bench guys who were so effective all season as much here. And this is such a killer because you see what Kornet's capable in this game. You see what Pritchard's capable of in a couple different spots in the series, and you finally found it, but you're still on the brink of elimination, and you still have this real uphill battle to win this series. This has been a rough series for Joe. Obviously, his roughest since 2023. I don't think he's managed the roster well. I don't think the game plans have been great. Obviously, managing the leads in this series. And if you look at the stats, Chris, this is probably going to go down if it continues where they have all these double-digit leads in these games and continue to win for a big percentage of these games. Probably the largest share of a lead in a series a team has ever had while losing that series. I think after game 4, I looked at it, and it would have been, if the Knicks won at that point, the lowest share of a lead in the total minutes in a series for any team that won a series. The Knicks would have been. At that point.
That's crazy. Yeah, that's insane, Bobby. Yeah, and it's interesting too with Joe from the standpoint of, and look, he was proven right clearly in game 3 in New York, but people sort of get on Doc Rivers all the time, and Doc Rivers was the one who coined the make miss league, and I feel like Joe sort of in a more like a more fancier way basically says the same thing. Like when he talked to B-Rob, Brian Robb of Mass Live and said, well, the duality of your question of asking about, oh, the Knicks made their threes and we missed. I mean, if you're as a coach basically just going to throw up your hands and say like, well, we make them when we make them and we miss them when we miss them, and you're not going to adjust, well, what do I need you for?
And that's what it's looked like in this series. That game 4, they're leading. They're shooting 50% from 3 late into the third quarter. They missed 6 straight threes in that third. And then it's like, here it goes. And another double-digit lead's gone in the fourth.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, one. So again, I had a good feeling about the Celtics in Game 5. I didn't think they'd blow them out by 25, but I had a good feeling. I thought they'd respond, and I think sometimes, yes, the Celtics are banged up, but sometimes I think we forget what their overall talent is in terms of all NBA player and Jaylen Brown, multiple-time champion, all-star caliber player when he's right, and Drew Holiday, the 6th man of the year, and Peyton Pritchard. I know Porzingis isn't right, obviously, and then playoff Al is a different animal. But when you look at it, the 2 games in this series they've won, Bobby, they've shot 50% from 3 and 45% from 3. And when they lost in Game 4, they shot 37.5, which is like, that's really respectable. That's kind of like a baseline, like if you shoot 37.5, that's kind of like average-ish for a good shooting team like them. And they couldn't win that game. So it scares me a little that the only 2 games they've won, they've shot lights out from 3. And if that's their only path to victory, not only in this series, but if somehow they get beyond this series, you just can't ride that all the way through. Like, that's not going to last, particularly without Tatum.
Yeah, for sure. In this matchup, it's staggering how little they can get to the paint, how rarely they've been able to get by some of the perimeter defenders. It's still so interesting to me with Tatum. He was not looking good on the perimeter, separating from a guy like Brunson, separating from some of their other perimeter defenders leading up to that injury. So I almost wonder if he was dealing with something else leading up to that, because he just didn't look like, to me, his usual self when it came to that burst off the dribble. Obviously, he had the wrist things going on too, so maybe that goes back to the handle. I don't know. But that was something I thought about after he got hurt there. And obviously, Porzingis can't take advantage of these mismatches right now. Brown did a better job last game. But the offense, and it's not just this series. You remember the Orlando series too, Chris. The offense wasn't good in that series either.
Oh.
And it's not a great look right now, I think, for this coaching staff. I think the stars have underperformed to some degree here, too, for this team on a whole in the postseason. The Porzingis thing just stinks, though. And I don't know if you've ever seen anything like this, where he misses 8 games. He comes back and looks like himself at the end of the year. You remember that game at MSG where he hit 8 threes, including the game winner in overtime?
Yes, I
mean, that was just electric stuff from him. And this was probably the best regular season of his career. First round, he wasn't great, but it didn't look like fatigue or, a lack of minutes or whatever he's been dealing with now. That hit in game 1 of this series, where just out of nowhere, he disappears off the bench, misses the second half. And ever since, he's been 5% of who he usually, like, I would put the number at a tiny percentage of who he usually is. And it's been devastating because they've continued to play him. There was maybe a little bit of a stretch in game 3 where he's blocking Towns a couple times late. He had a lot of blocks in that game where he helped you a little bit. But it's just felt more disruptive than anything, trying to force his involvement rather than going in a different direction, because this guy right now, for whatever reason, and there, who knows, might be some scarier reasons behind it here, that cannot help them right now. And it's such a bummer too, and we'll get to the big picture thing in a moment, because it does feel like this will be the last memory of him here in green, not the big moment where he's cutting his head open and the crowd's going crazy in game 2 against Orlando, and not the moment where he's coming back against the Mavericks and hitting every shot, which endeared him to this fan base. As much time as he missed, this fan base fell in love with him and his personality and all that. It's been a lot of frustration among the fans over how this postseason has gone here. And I think a lot of it's gone too far, because something's clearly wrong with him here. I don't think this is him being soft or him not pushing through. He's trying and just can't. And I think Joe has to make the call right now. Unfortunately, he did last game.
Yeah, no, he did. I mean, he didn't play in the second half, and it's just given the spot that they're in. And you talked about the rotations getting tighter and not having a lot of depth. And we know Al Horford's age, and Luke was great in game 5, but can you ask him to play heavy minutes and produce the same way again? And we know the NBA axiom about role players. They'll have a game like Luke had at home, but it's harder to
That's
have that
what
game
scares me
on the road. So I almost feel like Joe kind of has to go back to the KP well based on what
Really?
KP is telling him today, what he tells him tomorrow at the shoot around. Look, if KP's telling him, I don't feel any better than I felt in game 5, then you say no way. But if KP's telling him, I feel better, Joe, I feel closer to game 4, I think you got to give him a shot. I do. I really feel that way. I think you got to give him a shot early on. And it's a quick hook. You know, you can't give him a lot of rope, Bobby, but just given where they're at in terms of overall depth, even if he's, and you said he's been 5 to 10% of what he normally is in the playoffs. And I agree with that. But even if he can get up to 40% of what he normally is, that type of player could help them from a rotation standpoint. And I also would say that the other reason I'd give him a shot is that now that Brown's the focal point of the offense, I don't think there's another player on the team that Brown has better chemistry with than Porzingis. And I think Porzingis can bring stuff out of Brown's game that we didn't really see before KP got here. So again, if there's any chance he can give you anything based on, again, how he feels. I mean, if he's telling you he still can't breathe and it's exactly the same as game 5, I'm with you. Don't even try it. But if he tells you he feels better and you see him in shoot around and he looks a little better, I would roll the dice. I might not start him, but I would roll the dice and say, like, let's see if you can give us anything.
Yeah, and that's what they did last game. They got off to a rough start. He got off to a rough start, and I just don't know if you can afford that on the road where they're going to get going nuts in there at MSG and things will start to pile up a little bit, and it'll be tougher to turn things around, especially for some of those role guys coming off the bench. The other question you have is, will those role guys be as effective going against the Knicks starters, especially Pritchard? And I felt like Pritchard should have started too last game, just based on what he's been giving them in this series and trying to maximize those guys' lineup time together. They got to that look eventually. It was White, Holiday, and Pritchard playing together. I believe they put up 150 offensive rating, and that's not a look they've gone to this year. Yeah, it was incredibly effective yesterday, and they haven't played those guys together.
And another ball handler, which I think helps. It helps White when he's out there, helps JB when he's out there. I know they maybe have some defensive concerns, but he gives you the effort, and he is a pest on defense. His size is never going to change, but yeah,
he's been great defensively this postseason. I feel like he's held up in just about every game.
Agreed.
Meanwhile, Horford, Porzingis -15, 101 offensive rating, 116 defensive rating in this series. It just not getting the job done. So they got to go in a different direction there. And if it's not the start, it's got to be fast. It's got to be a quick adjustment. And they got Pritchard in there a couple minutes into the game because of Holiday's foul trouble, as Joe said after the game, and with Porzingis, it was the breathing there. So the worry you have is that they might not have even made those adjustments if those things didn't go the way they did there. They had a reason to go in a different direction. It's frustrating right now. I'm a Joe proponent. I think he's done a lot of great things over the recent years. I've just been shocked how Tibbs has outcoached him here in this series and how he's been slow to react to in-game swings and developments on his roster and needing to go in a different direction here, showing some flexibility. And he has a chance to turn it around here, but it's interesting, Chris. Like we talked about it, that a lot of heat came off them because of the Tatum injury. There's a whole different conversation around this team, even coming off of a win like this, because you're still down 3-2. You could still potentially lose the series tomorrow. This is a disaster. It really is. Losing this series, losing this chance to potentially repeat as champions here while seeing your window close to do so with the Tatum injury in all probability. Those things just all happening at once. And again, Tatum went down at the end of that game where you're down 9 after that turnover. Time's running out. You're probably going to lose that game anyway. So it doesn't absolve them too much. It doesn't absolve Joe. It doesn't absolve the other guys on this roster who have come up short. I think there's a lot of blame to go around here, but this is really going to go down to me as one of the bigger upsets in NBA history if the Knicks close this out. No one in the world was giving the Knicks a chance coming into this series. The Vegas odds were absurd. Maybe people, including myself, should have given the Knicks more credit because I think they've done some good things in this series. But this is, like we've talked about with the double-digit leads and 2 20-point leads in the first 2 games at home. This is that classic case of like, oh, who won it and who lost it. The Celtics have lost this series. They should not be in the position they're in right now.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. And to your point about, when Tatum's injury struck, I think there will be some revisionist history if the Celtics lose this series. People will try and make it like Game 7 Miami in 2023. And it's like, no, they were going to lose anyway. The win probability for the Knicks when OG Anunoby stole the ball was 95%. Because I went back and looked it up. But before that play, before the Celtics even ran the play where Tatum passed the ball to Jaylen Brown, the win probability for the Knicks was 89%. So it's like they were probably going to lose anyway. There shouldn't be that revisionist history. And you're right. And that's what's so devastating about the whole thing. Tatum's injury. It would be one thing if we would still be having a lot of the same discussions about the window closing and you being in a situation where you squandered a golden opportunity, even if Tatum didn't tear his Achilles, because you don't know what the roster is going to look like next year. And if you bow out in the second round to a Knicks team that was 0-10 during the regular season against the three best teams in the league, record-wise, Oklahoma City, Cleveland, and the Celtics, absolutely. I mean, that would be a huge upset. I mean, I was saying this series was going to go 6 and the Celtics were going to win. And people were saying, you're giving the Knicks too much credit. They're going to sweep them. It's going to be over in 5. So you're absolutely right on the upset part of this. And it would be an all-time upset. But I think the Celtics are going to get a little dispensation, a little grace, because people are going to just remember that Tatum injury. And I think they'll look at that Tatum injury as marking the closing, if the Celtics lose a series, the closing chapter of this era of Boston basketball, and not sort of the overall series loss to the Knicks, not getting down 3-1.
How are you feeling about their chance to come back here, though?
I feel that they can push it to 7. I really think the pendulum of pressure swung back to the Knicks. If the Knicks don't win this in 6, it's going to be a real challenge, I think, for them to win it. I really do. So I'm feeling pretty good about the Celtics right now.
2 days off, by the way, if they win tomorrow, which helps.
Yeah, I'm feeling pretty good about their
guys.
chances, both in Game 6 and overall. But I think you're going to see the Knicks' best punch in Game 6. We've sort of been down this road before, though, right? And this is where I have to stop and sort of censure myself a little bit. And again, 2023, 3-0, you come back.
Doesn't it feel like 2023?
It does. It does. And I was thinking about this the other day, Bobby. Think about how many big games the Celtics have had, like Game 7s they've had on their home court, or even like just big games like Game 6 of the 2022 finals. Where
trailing in a series.
Yeah, they're on their home court and they have a chance to win or extend the series. I like their odds. And then they lose.
That's how it feels to me. You could push this to a 7th. Everyone thinks it's going to go the other way at that point. Maybe the Celtics get a little comfortable and confident at that point, and that's when they let down. There really is just still, even after the championship, a mental component with this team of playing at home or playing in advantageous positions where they're expected to roll and not coming through in those moments. And then on the opposite end, when everyone thinks they're done, like yesterday, they come through with one of their best efforts of the season. It's pretty wild, the swings that they have in terms of what team shows up in different moments here. But it's hard to pick the Celtics here still when you consider the Porzingis, development. Brown, is he going to have enough to carry the amount of weight he needs to? There's still an enormous amount of pressure on Horford. And again, those 2 days help you after this. If they can get through Game 6, they're going to play a Game 7 on Monday if they win tomorrow. So that's something working in their favor. You would think the home court would work in their favor. There'll be Knicks fans there, as you mentioned, with the crowd and all that. It's been a little split. But that's going to be a monster atmosphere there tomorrow in MSG. And maybe there'll be some tense fans there. I think you'll definitely feel a little bit of tension in that building. Like the Game 4 was explosive. The Game 3 was big expectations that faded fast because they went down so quickly and in big fashion, 20, 30 points. This one's going to be more of that tense crowd, and that could help the Celtics out a little bit there. I'm torn. I could see anything happening here. I thought the series was going to be a sweep, Chris. I can't even lay a finger on.
So you were in the sweep camp. I was saying Celtics in 6. I was like, the Knicks are a little different with Mitchell Robinson. I didn't think,
and they have been,
but I thought the Knicks were a little different with Mitchell Robinson, and you'd get more pushback. But I certainly didn't expect this. One thing that is interesting, though, that Knicks crowd at MSG. I mean, you're talking about a hex star-crossed franchise, as you mentioned, haven't been to the Eastern Conference Finals in 25 years. I think if things start to go awry for them, it's going to be like, the Bruins crowds in Game 7s where people are just fatalistic and they're waiting for the other shoe to drop, and you can feel it in the building. There's just this like anxiety and agita in the building with the crowd. I think you're going to hear that and feel that if the Knicks get in a situation of a slow start or they're trailing, where you're going to have that crowd just sort of the whole PTSD factor of being a Knicks fan, being like, here we go again.
I'll throw in this too from game 3 when they're sending Robinson to the free throw line and he airballs that free throw and just puts his head down the line, which I've never really seen anything like that. Him just succumbing to the pressure out there or his struggles like that visibly. That sent him into a tailspin when that happened there. And he started hitting his free throws actually last game, which is interesting because the Celtics just keep following him. But he's been a major swing factor in this series for all the people that thought he could be. And I wasn't buying that because it didn't sound that important. A guy like him swinging a series that was this lopsided during the regular season. But Knicks have outscored the Celtics by 26 points with Robinson off the floor. The Celtics have outscored the Knicks by 61 points when he's been off the floor.
Oh, wow.
So that explains some of Joe's urgency to get him off there with the fouling, but it hasn't been as effective in recent games after it was that great in game 3. But it's another element here, and he's been a force that they've struggled to handle here. But some of the things that worry me going into this one, they sent the Knicks to the free throw line 40 times last game, and they've sent them there a ton in this series. Which if the Knicks are hitting more shots, that's a problem, giving them all those extra points. Awful 2-point shooting from the Knicks in this one. So bad. I think it was 33% in game 5, where you think that's going to go in the other direction a little bit there. The offensive rebounding advantage that they're starting to find here worries me a little bit, as well as, the turnover battle at times when the Celtics have been their worst at this series. They've really struggled in that area. And it just brings us back to what we said earlier. Is this just going to be a matter of do the Celtics make shots or miss shots here at MSG? And that's going to decide their season. I hate that it's boiling down to that for them because they were such a more flexible, versatile, multi-dimensional team during the year than this.
Yeah, I think it's going to come down to their defense. I do. I mean, obviously the shot making, they're going to need it, but really defensively, can they force the Knicks into difficult shots? Can they impose their will defensively, get the Knicks to go with some of those stretches where they're not able to convert, a made field goal? Try and change the game, take control of the game, dictate the game defensively. I think if they can do that, like I'm kind of expecting this game 6 to be based on who the Celtics have available, how tired they're probably going to be, the pressure on the Knicks. I'm kind of expecting this to be more like game 2, like a 91-90 rock fight. I don't think this is going to be a high scoring game. I could be wrong, but I think it's going to be more of a rock fight and who's able to make the plays in the end to win. And so things like you mentioned, turnovers, second chance points, fouls, free throws, all that type of stuff, I think could make the difference on the margins in terms of who wins this thing. And then there's the factor that we've seen in this series. If the game is close in the fourth quarter, it's advantage Knicks because of Brunson. I mean, he's earned that Clutch Player of the Year award many times over. So if it's close and Brunson has the ball, I think you have to lean towards the Knicks.
Yeah, for sure. The crunch time's been no contest in this thing. If it's been a blowout, the Celtics have won. If it's been a close game, the Knicks have won. And that doesn't seem like it's going to change here, especially after Tatum goes down. Again, I have no idea where this thing's going, but I do want to talk some big picture with you here if they do end up losing this thing. What are you doing next year? It's going to be a challenge. It's going to be a bit of a reset. We knew that already. But now you're in a spot where you're like, all right, do you want to reset the luxury tax? Do you want to reset the second apron line here, knowing that this probably isn't going to be a championship contention season here? There's some stuff that they can do that I think looks obvious at this point. I think moving off Kristaps Porzingis' expiring contract after how rarely he's been available over the last 2 years is probably a no-brainer. Drew Holiday, you're still seeing the level he can play at here, which is probably almost a positive for them because I do think there'll be some suitors for him around the league despite his contract being a tiny bit bloated, especially in the last 2 years of it there. That might be a tougher deal to move just logistically, but that's probably the straightest path to moving under that tax line is moving off Porzingis, moving off Holiday. There's been some talk of moving Brown here, which I really don't get. I guess that allows you to bottom out potentially. And some people like the idea of that if you're going to lose a season anyway from a championship standpoint. But to me, you just saw the teams that tanked this year lose the lottery.
Yeah,
you
Utah,
see how
Washington, Charlotte.
Yeah, you see how tough it is to get out of that hole and how long it can take. I just don't think when you have a star like Jaylen Brown who can keep you afloat through this year, and maybe that turns into something with some of the younger guys around him. I always prefer to stay in the mix rather than bottom out, especially in this sport and where it's gone for teams that bottom out like that. I don't know what the return would be for Brown. And again, like you said it earlier, the strength of this team has been having both of those guys. And the only hope they have to get through this year without it being a disaster is Brown being that one, all NBA, whatever you want to call it, kind of star here to carry this team. And, I think his leadership will be important for some of the younger guys as they try to vault them up and get them more involved. I think Al Horford, who's a free agent here, returning him in some capacity will be important. And Luke Kornet's a free agent as well. So there's a lot of moving parts going on here this summer. And obviously some level of budget that they're going to have to get below here with the new ownership. So we're just beginning to wrap our heads around it. I really have no idea what's going to happen yet here, but what's your first impression now that Tatum's going to be out for most, if not all of next year, about how they should go through the summer?
Yeah, I don't want a full tank. I would move Drew, not because he's not still good, but just there's 3 years left on that deal and it goes up a little bit next year. And I think he has value. And so, depending on, I'm not always fully aware of all the machinations of the CBA, but depending on what you could get back in terms of, players and a draft pick, that would be great. I think he still has value and maybe you can get a little younger there and get some assets that help you down the road when Tatum is back. Porzingis is an interesting one because I feel like if you move him this offseason, you're selling really low. I know he's an expiring deal, so someone might want to just take them into that cap space. On the other hand, though, if you want to make the playoffs, depending on how it works out financially and how much money they have to cut to get below the second apron, I might just hold on to him because it's the last year of his deal anyway. And then, I'll make that move and just sort of let him walk at the end of the year. I probably would try and move Hauser too, as that goes up to 10 million. Again, if I'm not a championship team, do I need to spend $10 million on a shooter off the bench? Probably not. Maybe Baylor Shireman is ready, or you can find Drew Peterson. Somebody else can sort of fill that role. So those are the moves that I would make. The other thing of not moving Porzingis for me, again, unless it's just strictly to make the numbers work to get under the second apron, is that what you mentioned. Horford's a free agent. Kornet's a free agent. You don't have a lot of depth up front. And I know he's not a guy that plays 82 games or anything close to it. But again, if you want to try and make the playoffs next year, I think you need some size in your front court. And so I would try and hold on to him. Hope you can figure out what his medical situation is. You rehabilitate him. And you know what? If you get halfway through the year and he's having a great year, then maybe you trade him to somebody as a rental. I just don't love the idea of offloading him now and selling so low when you're so uncertain and unsettled in the front court.
Well, that is a good point because the second apron penalties, the tax penalties, those hit you at the end of the year. So there's not necessarily an incentive to get below those lines over the summer. Like you could go into the year with a guy like Porzingis, see how it goes, see how competitive you are. And then if it's not looking good midway through, move off that money at the deadline. It's a little easier or it's a little more difficult to move off money midseason because no one has cap space and all that, of course. But there's ways to do it. There's ways around all this stuff here, especially if you do move off one of your bigger deals at the start of the summer. But I don't know, the Brown thing, it's going to be a discussion, right? Because you're trying to figure out ways to reset right now. Maybe he's the guy with the most value potentially going out the door to bring in significant prospects, significant picks, maybe even one of the top picks in this year's draft. If there's a guy that you really like up there from a team like San Antonio or, whoever's up there at the top of the draft right now, I'm willing to consider anything. And I think they should just because of how difficult of a spot they're in right now. But again, to me, the stability he provides, the leadership, the length you have him under contract here too. It's not like he's going to be a free agent after this year. You have him for many more years ahead into the future. I get that it's tough to build a team around two supermax guys. But to me, if you go in the tank here, it's going to be really difficult to get out of that spot.
Well, and the other thing I'd say is, again, I think some of these trade Jaylen Brown assumptions are, or I should say, some of these trade Jaylen Brown discussions are based on the assumption that when Jayson Tatum comes back, he's going to be exactly the same player he was before and maybe even a little better. He might not be. So in other words, he might need that 1A guy more than he did before, or it might become more of an even partnership than it was before, at least in the first year Tatum's back. So if the idea here is, oh, we're going to trade Jaylen Brown and get all these pieces to surround Jayson Tatum with, well, you have to make sure Jayson Tatum's going to come back as the full Jayson Tatum before you do that. If not, I mean, there's a possibility. I'm not saying that's a probability, but there's a possibility he comes back and he's the number 2, because Jaylen had a great year and he's healthy, and Tatum's 80% of what he used to be. So he's the 1A, and you'd still be a championship team. So I just think you can't do this and assume that you're just going to have the exact same Jayson Tatum, and then you're just going to have this, sort of like Tom Brady and the Patriots, right? Where they had one group of guys around him. Those guys aged out or moved on, and then they put a younger group of guys around him. But the constant, the fulcrum was Tom Brady, who continued to be Tom Brady. And that's my best case scenario for Tatum, is that, ultimately we look back on this injury the same way we look back on Brady's torn ACL. It was just a blip in a career of brilliance, but you don't know that. And so I wouldn't be offloading Jaylen Brown at this point until I've at least seen Jayson Tatum in the rehab process and have some idea of what he's going to be like when he comes back.
For sure. Yeah, you need that franchise stability, and he provides that right now. You're so fortunate to have a second star in this spot, because for a lot of teams, if you lost a guy at Tatum status, you do not have anything left to compete, and no hope of winning a game like yesterday's or even having a season next year. But when you look at the East, Chris, I mean, who you really scared of next year surpassing you? I'd say you're above half the teams that are still in rebuild mode to some degree. The Bucks might move on from Giannis. Detroit and Orlando are ascending a little bit here, but some other teams are probably going to go downward, and Philadelphia's got the whole Embiid question mark. The East is not in a good place still. So to me, there's no real concern about missing the playoffs next year. Maybe you end up in a play-in scenario at the worst, but I think they could be the 5th or 6th seed at the very least, and maybe even better than that, depending on what kind of moves or what kind of roster changes have to happen this summer. But the big killer is losing Tatum, on top of losing a Holiday, on top of losing maybe a Porzingis or something like that here too. And there's some uncertainty with Horford. It feels like he's laying the groundwork of trying to actually negotiate some money out of them. Based on some of the reporting it looks like here that's popped up over the last month or so. And Kornet, based on what he's done this year, like, I know there's some hope that they could keep him around there, but a guy like him, not many teams have backup centers around the league. So someone might use some mid-level space, might get a little more aggressive there to get a backup like him in the door. You hope he wants to stay, because that's obviously what he did last summer, is just took the minimum to keep playing with this team. But there are going to be a lot of changes this summer, and you hope that they can hang on a little longer here and show some competitiveness and prove that this group should by and large return to stay competitive here and have a good framework for a team. But it looks like this thing's gonna end soon here, and you just gotta brace for some difficult moves this summer. And man, it's crazy how quickly things can change. I said it to someone the other day on the lottery night. Who would have guessed that day that you could argue Dallas would be in a better place by the end of the night than this Boston team that day?
Wow. I never thought of it like that. Wow. I didn't think of it like that, but that's crazy. I mean, the whims, the vicissitudes of the NBA, you just, you don't know. Just to go back to because I think, you're dialed in on this stuff. How much money do they have to slough off to get below the second apron for next year? Because I think, that's a factor too. In other words, when you look at it, are you better off making sure you get under the second apron? And let's say you could bring back Horford and Kornet if you get rid of Porzingis and Holiday.
That's sort of my thinking right now. And again, I haven't really wrapped my head around all the different, ways that this is going to happen. They're obviously going to have to take some money back in some of these trades too,
yes.
Right? You're not just offloading this money.
Yes.
So when I think about it, you have, let's say, 12 players under contract next year. You're 22 over the tax, which is a problem too, because their tax bill is just massive. And you're 4 over the second apron. So getting under the second apron won't be difficult. Getting under that tax line is probably going to be a little more painful. And you reset your repeater tax rating and all that stuff at this point. There's a lot of stuff you can benefit from by cutting the cost for next year, along with opening the door for a Shireman. I think Pritchard should start next year. See what you have there, especially with this contract he's on and all that too. Like, does that become an Isaiah Thomas situation if you just give him more opportunity and more shots and all that? Like, I'd like to see that. I wouldn't even mind Kornet starting next year if you bring him and Horford back to ease the load off Horford, because obviously he can't play the whole regular season at that point. I like some of the things we saw from Cade earlier this season, but
they got to hit on some draft picks too. I mean, I know it's not easy, but they're going to have 28 and 32. I mean, you would like to get something out of there.
I wonder if you can package those up and move up and try to get more of a bona fide guy that you can actually really try to work around and develop next year. Because, some of the younger guys they have right now, I know Shyman was in the G League for a lot of the year. Walsh hasn't shown too much at all. Davison, I don't know how much hope there is there for, like, they don't have blue chip prospects who are going to turn into real hardened rotation players. Like, these are guys on the edge of an NBA roster. So I almost wonder if you're flipping out a lot of these guys, trying to bring in some, younger cast-offs that you liked. Remember, they brought in Jaden Springer, who they liked in that draft, and tried him out. Didn't really work. Stuff like that, I think you're going to have to look into. And again, there's going to be some guys lower on this roster who, Torrey Craig's not going to be back. Xavier Tillman, I wonder how much is left in his career after how limited he became with injuries and stuff this year. That was a kind of a bummer the way that addition went. So there's going to be, it's crazy. They ran this whole team back. Maybe half the team's back next year.
Wow,
at most. It's crazy. Wow. Yeah. So, and it happened fast. We're talking championship a week ago, and now I'll call it reset. I don't think this is a rebuild. I think this is a reset next year, which, depending on how much you like the sport, depending on how much you like watching young guys, that sort of thing, low expectations. Some of the more fun seasons they've had over the last decade or so here, the Isaiah year where they go to the East Finals, the year Hayward went down and they went to the East Finals and almost made the finals. Those were some of the more enjoyable watching experiences to me. And, as great as the championship contention years were these last 2-3 years, there's a lot of pressure. There is a lot of tension and just disappointment, when they lose and that sort of thing. Like they can't win unless they win everything during those years. Next year, there'll be an ability for them to surprise people a little bit more. And I think endear themselves to fans, despite how frustrating of a moment and spot they're in right now.
Yeah, and maybe it'll give Joe a chance to show what he can do in terms of developing some young guys. Again, if you move Holiday out and you get some younger pieces back, maybe that shows Joe's ability. Because, people forget, that was basically what Joe's job was, with Tatum, helping as a development coach, like a skills coach. So can he do that with some of the younger guys without that pressure of it sort of being like championship or bust? This was a weird year to begin with, I thought, for them, because you could see some of this stuff coming, not the Tatum injury, but even if he didn't get hurt, even before he got hurt, there was discussion about this is the last ride. This is the last dance. I wrote that during training camp, that this was the last dance for the
Celtics. With the ownership change.
Yeah. You could see this coming in terms of, you knew you weren't going to be able to keep this together for very long. And it just shows you how fickle sports can be in terms of what they've had to deal with injury-wise. It was Brown's injury. Well, even before that, it was, mallet finger for Holiday. And then you have Brown's injury.
Physically.
Yeah, Holiday's hamstring, Tatum's wrist, just Porzingis' situation with this illness coming back. They just have not had the type of luck that they needed. And there's a lot of luck involved. The team was built to be a championship team and would, to me, still be, I know Oklahoma City beat them twice during the regular season, but to me would still be the odds-on favorite to win the championship if they were fully intact and fully healthy.
When we were breaking it down going into the playoffs, Chris, you knew it was going to be harder this year. You knew there were more challengers, and Cleveland fell apart here too, which is worth mentioning. It's crazy how that went as well. So a lot of the things we expected. Oklahoma still hasn't sealed up their series out west. This has been a totally unpredictable postseason, but you still thought if this group was somewhat together, there was too much here. There was too much shooting, too much depth. It always felt like the other team was really going to have to put it together in a significant way to be able to win 4 games against them. And so there was just, in all probability, despite a lot of the stuff we watched this year where you went, that doesn't look great, or January, they struggle. And, there were some shades of 2023 with the signs, the red flags you watched during the year. But you still said, oh, there's just too much talent here. Porzingis is going to be available this time around. You got Brown and Tatum, who you're always going to get one of those guys doing their thing. The depth's great. And so, when I was looking at it, I was like, maybe Oklahoma City can beat them. That's it. They're going to get through the East. They're going to get to the finals. And Oklahoma is not as experienced as them. And that could be a factor there. So the one thing that could kill them was injuries, um, health falling apart overall. And it's strange because that happened, but it's not really the reason they lost. Like, they did not come through in this series with enough health to be able to at least get through this series. So it's a weird ending for this team. And, people are talking about like the end of an era. And again, I'm still trying to wrap my head around that a little bit too, because I think this core is going to have a second statement and, a second act here in a couple years. But wow, like, you thought this might be a 2-3 year run. Now they're just like everybody else that won the one championship, Toronto, Milwaukee, Denver. Like, they're the latest in those lines of teams that were great that one year that they got it done, but weren't able to turn into a dynasty. And this looked like it could have been a potential dynasty here.
Yeah, it did. I mean, they certainly look like they could repeat. I mean, we'll see what happens. It's interesting. Look, Indiana has the fourth best record, or had the fourth best record during the regular season from January 1 on. But I think if you had told a lot of Celtics fans, oh, it's going to be Indiana again in the Eastern Conference Finals before the playoffs started, they'd say, all right, we'll take that. So it's one of those things. There's a part of me, it's a very small part of me that looks at it and says, okay, if they can somehow get past the Knicks and reset and get in another series with Indiana,
I know, right? I shouldn't talk about like it's over, but it feels like it's over. Maybe I'm wrong because I was wrong about this series. Maybe I'll be wrong about this too. But
yeah,
tomorrow's the night, right? You win that one. It's a toss-up in a Game 7, and you're at home. And who knows? The Knicks could get banged up for down the stretch of the series here too. Brunson's in foul trouble. Towns is in foul trouble every night. You do have to say in a series where would you say they're up 35 in the net score?
Plus 35 overall. Yeah,
you would think that it would at least go down to the wire with an advantage that big in the scoring. Because again, they've been up double digits in every game. You don't go into any single game saying, oh man, how are they going to win this one? Because they've been up by double digits in every game. So that'll probably be the case in this one. It just, can you close it out? And then that would probably be the case in a Game 7. And at that point, it's, can you close it out? And if you do, like you just said, you have home court on Wednesday next week against Indiana, who you swept last year. So listen, I'll give you guys some hope. If you want to lean on that, you have enough here. Brown has been great. Horford, when he has the rest, can reach another level. White was awesome last night. He
was tremendous.
Like gamer. When the series games on the line, you remember Game 6 in Miami to make that 2023 comparison again. He's going to come through in a big spot, and Holiday's been really good this postseason as well. So there is enough here to push this series to the brink. So I'll push back off my doom and gloom a little bit.
All right, there you go. No, seriously, I mean, I do think, look, it's tough. Coming back from 3-1 is really difficult, even if you have a full complement of players. So I get where you're coming from. But I do think in the haze of the Tatum injury and the rightful discussion about breaking up the team, which I think was going to happen one way or the other, Tatum injury or no Tatum injury, I think just sometimes we kind of forget, like I said, and what you just said, just how much talent is still on the team. Even without Tatum and obviously this Porzingis situation. I mean, they're not what they should be because of those situations, but they're still, like, I don't watch them against the Knicks without Tatum and without Porzingis and think, oh my God, they're totally overmatched.
They're not overmatched at all.
Talent wise,
yeah. In fact, they might still have the best player in the series on the whole. If you look at how Brunson's played through the whole in the series versus Brown, it's been close. And then, you stack up the other guys from there. It's close as well. And, they've limited Towns. They've limited Bridges. And OG was, 1 of 12 last game. So that Knicks offense hasn't really gotten going for a lot of the series too here. It's going to be interesting. I'm really intrigued to be in the building tomorrow night. There's a lot of different ways that could go. It feels like this group's galvanized a little bit too. There is a little bit of the 2023 element in that sense too, that all belief is gone here. So there's no pressure on them. And like you said, Chris, there's going to be an enormous amount of pressure on the Knicks. You're up 3-1 if you're them and Tatum goes down. You have to close that series, especially with the chance to go to a finals, given that it's Indiana next round. Ooh, it is going to be tense in there tomorrow.
Yeah, definitely. I'm saying those Knicks, Ben Stiller, Timothy Chalamet, they're going to be biting their nails for sure. and you're going to feel it in that building if the Knicks get down or shots aren't falling. There's going to be that fatalistic sense, almost kind of that pre-2004 Red Sox fan sensibility of, oh no, here we go.
Here it goes.
They're going to let us down again. I'm telling you, you're going to feel it.
All they've ever done. I can't even imagine an NBA Finals game at MSG right now this year. Like it looks like there could be, because they've just been awful. They've just been letdowns at every turn. And this team's cool. I like this team.
I
There's
like
some
him
good
too.
personalities on there. Tibbs, like I'm sure you love seeing Tibbs after the
Yeah.
Celtics years and stuff. Yeah, there's a lot to like there. And they were all class after the Tatum thing. I love the way they handled that situation. And then just gave their well wishes and all that. I thought Towns said some good stuff after that game. But man, what a week. Tatum goes down for potentially a year here, all the way through next season with the Achilles surgery. Celtics go down 3-1 in this series, but get a great win last night to keep this thing going into New York tomorrow. 8 o'clock tip-off. We'll be there. Heading down tomorrow to go cover this thing. And it's going to be a late night out there, whichever way it goes. Could be some exit interviews. Could be looking ahead to a Game 7 on Monday. So this is the fun time of year, Chris. It was great to see you yesterday. We had a nice long locker room wait for everybody to talk. Someone said it. I loved it. They were like, they're honoring Tatum.
Yeah, that wasn't great for my deadline, but I got to catch up with a lot of my Celtics beat reporter friends. So that part of it was good, but I could have used a little more writing time.
Yeah.
But, hey,
yeah.
That's the way it goes.
Always great seeing you, Chris. Always great talking to you here on the Garden Report. Everybody check out all our content, which is just overflowing right now here on all the channels. Subscribe to Celtics All Access for coverage from these games, inside looks at the, press conferences and what's going on in the arena and all that. CLNS Media for all those press conferences after these games. You can check out some of our great podcasts. Sherrod and his Big Three podcast with Chris's colleague Gary Washburn, Kwani Lunis on there as well. You got Boston with Noah, our Garden Report podcast here as well. Subscribe to all that and more for all our content here. We'll go live if there's ever any news, so make sure hit the bell for notifications. And that's it for us here today. Thanks for Chris. Thanks again to Chris. There was a lot to talk about here today, and I think we covered all that ground here, man. Appreciate you.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Bobby. Always good to chop it up with you.
All right, and we will be live after the game tomorrow. We'll have shoot-around coverage as well in the morning. So, again, stay tuned for all that from New York City tomorrow. Madison Square Garden, Game 6, Celtics Knicks coming up on a Friday night. It's going to be crazy out there. We'll talk to you then.
No one's sneaking a vegan brownie by me, I'll tell you that.
Okay, you know what, John? We're going to do it.
You have to feel that way too, Bobby.
I have to feel that way. Let's
Yeah.
slide Al over and make Luke your first center.
Bobby, we gave you Luke hour early. We're not going to end this on a damn conversation about Luke